And welcome to this episode of the Capitalized Life and Retirement Show. I'm your host, Matthew Johnson, president and owner of Johnson Wealth and Income Management, a retirement income source located in Clear Lake and Humboldt, Iowa, serving clients in northern Iowa and southern Minnesota. Well, how are you today? I hope you're just taking a little bit of time for yourself, your family. I hope you're blessed and able to enjoy this time this weekend. You know, it's such a wonderful blessing to be a part of the show and to have you as a listener. And I hope that from time to time you can learn something. From time to time I can challenge you so that you can make your retirement even better than what you dreamed. Let me start out today's program by asking you a question. Have you ever heard the old idiom, in for a penny, in for a pound? You know, it's probably not as common in today's vernacular as it used to be, but the reality is this little idiom really carries with it quite a message. The idea is that if you're going to start a project, once you've started it, you might as well see it through to completion, regardless of the risk, regardless of the consequences. And I don't think anyone can shortchange President Trump. He gave us a lot of promises on his campaign trail. And so far, I have to say, he seems to be delivering with an entire load. This is all sorts of things happening every single day, every single week. We're getting barraged with all this news of initiatives and agendas that he's planning on trying to carry out. Well, today we're going to be discussing just one of those in the elimination of a currency that you probably have in your hip pocket. If you haven't heard about this, stick around. It's going to be kind of an interesting show, and we're going to somehow correlate that to your own retirement and what you're spending within your own retirement accounts for costs. We all have to be conscious of costs and of certain, and of course we know that President Trump is concerned with costs. He's concerned with expenses, and you'll find out why if you continue to listen to this radio show. Now, before we get into all of that, I just want to say welcome to the program. If this is brand new, if you've never been here before, if you've never listened to the radio show or you've never seen the podcast, I want to welcome you. This is a place that you can come to and you can use as a resource to better educate yourself about what it takes to retire with peace of mind. We all know that it's not what we're worth, but how much income we have every single month coming in that helps us to be able to maintain that lifestyle that we want in retirement. And if this is new to you, if this is something where you're just now starting to get to this stage of your life where you want to become more educated, more enlightened on what it takes to retire successfully, well, I encourage you, utilize every resource that we have. Listen to past radio shows on our website, Johnson, W-I-M, as in wealthincomemanagement.com. You can also read the numerous white papers. You can watch the YouTube videos. You can even pick up a copy of my book, The Capitalized Retirement. This is something that all major book resellers have, and it's something that you can pick up for a practical price that will be a resource for you throughout the course of preparing for retirement. So what is all of this news about President Trump eliminating a currency that you and I use and have and probably have an entire jar full of? Well, if you haven't been paying attention, you know that there's all sorts of things going on with respect to tariffs. We've had some tariffs, and then we've had the implementation of tariffs without any relenting. We know that he backed off from Canada and he backed off from Mexico for about a month and kind of put those on layaway for a little while. But now he's suggesting that he is going to put a tariff of 25% on all steel imports and on all aluminum imports. Now, what's interesting is immediately our mind begins to rationalize what's going to happen when we hear that we have 25% tariffs on steel and on aluminum. Why the value of cars are going to go up and the price that we're going to have to pay when we buy the next car. But you know what's interesting? When we go back in time and we look at the tariffs from 2017, it's pretty interesting to find that actually it had little to no effect whatsoever. And so one of the things that seems to be a giant irritant to President Trump is the inequality of what's coming into our country versus what is being pushed out of our country, what is being exported. Well, we all know that he has the efficiency czar, Elon Musk, that's now working to try to delve into literally every department of the United States government and find the inefficiencies, to find the fraud, the waste, the abuse. We all remember the years back during Desert Storm when the government was buying, toilet seats for, $200 and hammers for $20 and so on and so forth. Just very chronic fraud, waste, and abuse. And of course, we know that so far he has slashed literally billions of foreign aid spending. We know that there has been tremendous effort to try to reduce the amount of spending of our government. And the question begs, why? Why is he doing this? Outside of the reason that it makes sense to do it if you're a government. Well, the reality is that Trump really wants to increase tax cuts over the next 4 years of his term. And if you're going to be cutting taxes, for instance, if he's not going to be taxing tips, if he's not going to be taxing overtime, if he's got any chance in this world to not tax Social Security, well, those are all big revenue streams for the U.S. government. And so if we no longer are getting that revenue, we're going to have to learn to live on a lot less. And so in order to be able to implement those tax cuts, we've got to be able to offset those by saving money in other places. Otherwise, our debt is going to continue to balloon. And when it comes to debt, I don't know if you've been paying attention to the governmental debt, but it's a big deal. Back in 2017, we had $20 trillion in debt. Today, as things stand, we have over $36 trillion in debt as a nation. And when you look at the amount of debt that the public owns, that is nearly 100% of today's GDP in our country. So we were at a very desperate time in our country and in our economy. Things have to change. Accountability has to be brought forth. Various spending habits have to be reined in. There's zero question about it. But what is this currency that Trump is attacking? Well, interestingly enough, it is the penny. The penny is something that just up until recently, many people have never considered that it costs the government money to mint money. And when you think about how much it costs to mint even 1 penny, here's the interesting part. It is 3.69 pennies in order to be able to make 1 penny. And I don't know about you, but I consider that to be a real money loser. And that's kind of the point of all of this accountability that is being brought in. And of course, it is absolutely ruffling feathers when he says that he's going to put a reciprocal tariff on countries that try to tariff us. It ruffles feathers when he says that he's going to put a tariff on steel and aluminum. It ruffles the feathers of so many different departments and so many different people when he brings accountability into the government to say, you're now officially accountable to the American person, the American citizen, as to what you spend in your department. It's making a lot of people mad. It's making a lot of people nervous. It's making a lot of people absolutely angry. But guess what? This is your tax dollar. This is your tax dollar. And I think most of us as Americans would admit that taxes are an absolutely enormous strain on retirement. So in order to be able to focus on funding tax cuts, we've got to be able to create spending that is more within reason to what's coming in. If you spent money the same way that our U.S. government spent money, you would probably be in jail. You would probably, at the very least, be absolutely bankrupt with zero line of credit. But we all know what our government is great at doing. It's great at printing money. That's correct. And in this case, if we have any chance of bringing that $36 trillion of debt down, if we have any chance of seeing a continual cut to personal income tax, we want the government to become more accountable. We want the government to become more transparent. So, in for a penny, in for a pound. Trump does not seem to be in any way, shape, or form unrelenting in his quest to bring accountability to this government. So, love him or hate him, he's definitely delivering on his campaign promise to make America wealthy again. Now, where does that leave you and I? Why do we even care about whether a penny is minted for a penny or a penny is minted for 3.69 pennies? Well, where this relates to you and I is the fact that if the government is able to stop minting a penny, and they're able to save $454 million by stopping the circulation and the minting of a penny, what are some things that you and I need to be doing prior to retirement? What are the things that we need to be focusing on as far as spending is concerned? Let me ask you this question. When is the last time that you ever did a real thorough audit as to what your 401k is costing you, what your 403b is costing you, what your IRA or your Roth or your post-tax brokerage account is costing you? When's the last time that you looked to see if you have increasing fees in those annuities that the insurance agent sold you? You see, these are all the questions that retirees need to ask because, well, the reality is every dollar, in fact, let's make it even more minuscule, every penny that you spend in fees, that's a penny that you don't get to keep. That's a penny that doesn't get to pass on to your kids and to your grandkids. Now, we're going to come up on our first break, and after the break, we're going to come back and we're going to discuss what are the things that you can be doing to begin investigating just exactly how much you and your investments are costing you. This is something where decisions can save you not only a boatload of fees, but they can also help you discover where you're leaking money so that you can have even more income in retirement. If that sounds good, stick around. We will be right back after this quick break. And welcome back to the second half of the Capitalized Life and Retirement Show. I'm your host, Matthew Johnson, president and owner of Johnson Wealth and Income Management, a retirement income source located in Clear Lake and Humboldt, Iowa, serving clients in northern Iowa and southern Minnesota. Well, if you're just joining us, welcome to today's program. Today we're discussing in for a penny and in for a pound. It's that old idiom that if you're going to start a project, you might as well see it through to completion. And we know that it seems as though regardless of the risk or the consequences or who he makes mad, President Trump is absolutely on a mission. He's on a mission to eliminate as much fraud, waste, and abuse and inequality that our country has been suffering for many years in the effort to try to make more tax cuts for Americans come to fruition. Now, granted, this message isn't going to resonate with every single person. And I want to make certain that, you know what, when we look at the data, we're looking at it from the perspective of how does it affect you? Whether you're a person that's 40 or 50, maybe you're already retired, how does this correlate? Irrespective of political views. We know that what the president and what the government does, what the Federal Reserve does, those are things that are well beyond our control. But today we want to be discussing, are we taking control of our own finances? If this is something of interest, I encourage you, go to Johnson, WIM, as in Wealth Income Management. Give me a thumbs up, write me a message. Tell me, what do you think about what President Trump is doing? Is this something you agree with? Is this something that you're absolutely positively against? Is it something that you would like to see more of? I'm curious about your thoughts, so let me know what your thoughts are on my website, johnsonwim.com. So before the break, we discussed how President Trump is wanting to slash all of this spending, and one of the things that's on the chopping block is the United States penny. Now, for those of you that are saving your pennies, for those of you that collect pennies, I'm not really sure what's going to happen. I assume that the value of those things are going to probably go up in value. So that's good for you if you're a penny collector. But the reality is that he's trying to save money for the U.S. government. If he wants to implement no taxes on Social Security, which I think we can all agree would be amazing benefit to retirees, well, you got to come up with the revenue somewhere, because guess what? Taxes off from Social Security is a revenue source for our government. So in this case, does it really make sense to mint a penny and to pay 3.69 pennies to mint that 1 penny? And of course, the answer is no. But let's talk about you. Let's talk about, for just a moment, your 401k, your 403b, your IRAs, your Roths, your post-tax accounts, all of the things that we as investors, as savers for retirement, can invest our money in. Do we really know what these institutions are charging us? So the first thing that we want to look at is employer retirement accounts. You see, employer retirement accounts are not built the same. Yes, they all have similarities, I'm sure, from employer to employer. But the reality is that every employer and every institution that sets up that employer retirement program, that thing that allows you to payroll deduct and save for retirement, well, guess what? They get to set their fees in all of the design of that 401k or that 403b. And little do people know that despite what the HR person might tell you, despite what you think, the reality is that many of those employer retirement programs can be awfully expensive. In fact, the national average is over 2% per year. You have to remember that most employers might lead you to believe that they are taking and they're shouldering much of the responsibility of the administrative costs of that 401k or that 403b. And you know what? For your employer, that might actually be true. But how do you really know until you investigate it? And we have to go a step further. Do we think that the funds that we're investing in are absolutely free? In other words, let me ask you this question. Who do you think pays the fund manager for each of the funds that you're investing in? That's a good question to ask, something good to consider. You see, the reality is that if you're a fund manager, maybe you work for Franklin Templeton, maybe you work for Vanguard, whoever it may be that you're investing in, that family of funds is making money in some capacity. And the reality is that every single fund, just like every single 401k, can have a varied rate of cost and expense to you. Why does that matter to you? Well, it matters a lot because you see, if you're overpaying, number one, for the expenses within the 401k or the 403b, and then you're adding more expense on top of that through things like expense ratios, well, that can become more of a drag to the performance of your portfolio. Now, is there ways to eliminate this? Well, there's ways to reduce it and there's ways to eliminate it. The good news is that if you're over the age of 59 and a half, you got to understand that in many circumstances, your handcuffs have been taken off. You see, for most 401ks, once you make it to 59 and a half, you've now reached the point where you can roll your money tax-free from that employer plan, whether it's a 401k, whether it's a 403b. And there's many other employer accounts that you're able to roll that retirement savings account and the money in that account over to an individual retirement account, an IRA. And you can do that without any taxation and oftentimes without any expense. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, if your employer doesn't happen to be treating you maybe as fairly, or if the funds that are being offered to you are not quite as efficient financially as they should be, Well, that's the beauty of the IRA, because once money is rolled from an employer plan into an IRA, guess what? Now the world is your oyster. You get to invest in anything you want to. You want low fee funds? Well, guess what? You may have that opportunity in an IRA, where with your current employer retirement program, you may not have that opportunity. Now, let's just say for some of you that may be a little bit younger, you haven't made it to 59 and a half, you're kind of stuck. Well, this is where I recommend coming in and sitting down with an advisor, sitting down preferably with a fiduciary, making certain that you do a bit of an audit where you actually run an analysis on your 401k or your 403b. This is something I do all the time for individuals to help them understand the expenses that they are paying on the funds that they're currently investing in. What does this do for you? Well, it allows you the opportunity of realizing if you're overpaying and the funds that may be available to you that could be more cost effective. Why is that important? Well, let's just give you a simple analogy. Let's say that you were averaging somewhere in the vicinity of around 7 or 8% in average growth within the 401k. But all of a sudden, after analysis, you realize that you're paying, we'll just say 1.5%. Well, guess what? Where you're averaging 7, you could have been averaging better. You could have been doing 8 or 8.25, maybe 8.5, simply because you were reducing the amount of expenses that you were having to pay within that very account. Now, 1.5% doesn't sound like a lot, but think about what that would mean to you, even 1.5% over the next 10 years. If I'm doing my math right, that would be 15%. So you see, it does add up. And this is something that we must be conscious of. Now, let's talk about the individual side of things. So maybe you've got an individual brokerage account. Maybe you've got a joint account. Maybe you've got your own IRAs and your own Roths. When's the last time that you did an analysis where you walked in and you said, you know what, I need to figure out what I'm spending on these things? Is this really necessary? Is this something that's actually providing me a value for the cost that I'm paying? And you see, advisory models can change. They can be very different from one advisor to the next. Some advisors are going to, and institutions are going to charge you commissions. That means that you may get charged to purchase, you may get charged to sell. Some are going to charge you commissions even while you hold. So you have various different class shares. So you might have an A-class share, you might have a B-class share, you might have a C-class share. All of these things are meaningful to you, and it's generally not until someone explains it and you better understand and see for yourself what they mean to you, the investor, that you can then make a determination for yourself if you're overpaying. Now, another model is the fee-based advisor. But don't be fooled. Just because the fee-based advisor is a fee-based advisor, does that mean that you're being treated fairly? Just recently, I met with a woman who is about to retire. She has worked all the way to age 70. She is so ready to retire. But she worked long because she was afraid of that potential of running out of money. And it wasn't until we started to investigate where she had her money that we realized that her broker was charging her, her financial advisor, very name-recognized financial institution, was charging her 1.5%. And when she realized that, she called him and he said, well, I'll do you a favor. You're right. I'm overcharging you. I'll give you my management for 1.25%. What a nice guy. The reality, though, was that the gig was already up. We had already witnessed over 3 years worth of transactional history in that account. And you know what we found? That advisor was not at all managing the accounts. All he was doing was pushing a button, putting her into mutual funds. And guess who manages mutual funds? The mutual fund manager. So she was paying him to then take the work and give it to someone else, and they could get paid too. What a nice gig that was, huh? So you see, it's not until we discover, it's not until we look into and we begin to investigate, kind of like what Trump is doing. He's looking under every rock. He's trying to find every conceivable way to save money in the government so that he can deliver on tax cuts for us. And I would say that's meaningful. I would appreciate my taxes going down. I'm sure you would too. But we need to be thinking, okay, if I'm overpaying in my expenses, isn't that not hurting my performance? You see, these are all questions we have to ask. And no matter how long we've been with the advisor, no matter how much we might really appreciate the institution that we're with, we have to understand they've got to eat too. However, though I never have a problem paying a fee for a value add, if I'm overpaying, now there lies the problem. And this is something that I challenge you today. If you're in for a penny, you're in for a pound. Figure out exactly what your investments are costing you. Work with someone who can give you an analysis to determine, are you actually overpaying? Are you getting value for what you are spending in expenses within the management of your account, within the types of investments that you're investing in, so that you can have more money, more return, and consequently, you can have more income in retirement. Remember, the goal is to have more income than what you want in retirement. That's the definition of a successful retirement. I'm Matthew Johnson. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, it's up to you to make today a great day.